In the cold, calculating world of the 19th century aristocracy, a woman's worth was measured in titles and gold. For Rosalind Gable, a humble housemaid with nothing to her name but her dignity, her worth was about to be decided for her. She was commanded to marry a man she had never met, a duke known throughout the land not for his power, but for his monstrous size and gluttonous habits. They called him the Beast of Alderwood. But on their wedding night, locked away in the heart of his dark castle, the beast would shed his skin, revealing a secret so profound it would shatter her world and ignite a dangerous game of deception, treason, and forbidden love. The scent of beeswax and lemon clung to Rosalind's worn dress, a constant reminder of her station. For 10 years, since she was a girl of 8, Hawthorne Manor had been her world. She was an orphan, a ghost in the grand tapestry of the Beaumont family, visible only when a floor needed scrubbing or a fire needed stoking. She polished silver she would never use, laundered dresses she would never wear, and served dinners whose leftovers were richer than any meal she had ever eaten. Her life was a quiet rhythm of servitude, punctuated by the sharp tones of the housekeeper and the distant, imperious presence of Lady Genevieve Beaumont, the widowed matriarch who ruled the manor with an iron will encased in velvet gloves. The summons came on a Tuesday, an ordinary, grey afternoon that gave no hint of the storm about to break over her head. Rosalind was in the linen closet, counting sheets, when a footman told her Lady Beaumont wished to see her in the morning room. Such a direct command was unheard of. Maids were addressed through the housekeeper, existing as a collective entity, not as individuals. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at Rosalind's skin. Had she broken something? Offended a guest? She smoothed her apron, her hands trembling slightly, and made her way to the sunlit room where Lady Genevieve sat doing her needlepoint. The woman was elegance personified, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her spine ramrod straight. She didn't look up as Rosalind entered and curtsied. "Rosalind," Lady Genevieve began, her voice as crisp as autumn leaves. "You have been with us for a decade. You are diligent, plain, and blessedly quiet. These are admirable qualities in a servant." Rosalind murmured a thank you, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I have taken an interest in your future," the lady continued, finally setting aside her needlework. She looked at Rosalind then, her pale blue eyes analytical, as if assessing livestock. "A most singular opportunity has arisen, an opportunity for you to be elevated far beyond your current station." Rosalind's heart gave a hopeful flutter. Perhaps a position as a lady's maid for a newly married daughter? It was the pinnacle of a housemaid's ambition. "My nephew, the Duke of Alderwood, requires a wife," Lady Genevieve stated, and the hope in Rosalind's chest turned to ice. The Duke of Alderwood. Even in the servants' quarters, whispers of him circulated like a foul miasma. Duke Caspian Beaumont, a recluse who hadn't been seen in London society for years. A man whose appetites were said to be as vast as his fortune. Gossip painted him as a grotesque figure, morbidly obese, a mountain of flesh who did little but eat and wallow in the lonely splendor of his remote castle. He was pitied, feared, and mocked in equal measure. Rosalind's throat went dry. "My lady, I don't understand." "It is a simple arrangement," Lady Genevieve said, her tone dismissing any notion of complexity. "The Duke has no interest in the simpering debutantes of the ton. He requires a wife who will be uncomplicated. Someone to manage his household, bear his heir, and make no demands. You, Rosalind, are suitably uncomplicated." The room seemed to tilt. Marry him? The Beast of Alderwood? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She looked at Lady Genevieve, at the unyielding set of her jaw, and saw that this was not a proposal. It was a decree. "My lady, I am a maid. I have no title, no dowry. I am not worthy of a duke." It was a desperate plea, an appeal to the very class structure that had defined her entire life. "Your lack of connections is precisely what makes you worthy," Lady Genevieve corrected coldly. No ambitious father to meddle in the Alderwood finances. No scheming mother to fill the court with her relations. You are a blank slate upon which the role of Duchess can be written. And you will have me to guide you. The unspoken threat hung in the air. "And you will have me to control you." Tears pricked Rosalind's eyes, but she fought them back. Crying was a weakness Lady Genevieve would despise. "Forgive me, my lady, but I must refuse. I cannot." Lady Genevieve's face hardened, the genteel mask falling away to reveal the granite beneath. "You seem to be under the impression that you have a choice. Let me disabuse you of that notion." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Last month, a pearl earring from my jewellery box went missing. A trifle which I have not yet reported. It would be a simple matter for it to be found amongst your meagre possessions. A maid caught stealing from her mistress. Transportation is the typical sentence, is it not? Australia is very far away, I hear." The blood drained from Rosalind's face. It was a lie, a monstrous, cruel lie. But who would believe a servant over a lady of the peerage? She was trapped. A gilded cage had been presented as a gift, but the door was slamming shut behind her, and the alternative was a hell she couldn't bear to imagine. "You will marry him, Rosalind," Lady Genevieve declared, picking up her needlepoint again, as if the matter were settled. "You will become the Duchess of Alderwood. You will be grateful for the life I am giving you. The arrangements are made. You will leave for Alderwood at the end of the week." Rosalind stood frozen, the scent of lemon and beeswax now smelling of decay. She had been sold, her life bartered for a purpose she could not fathom. She was to be the bride of a monster, the keeper of a lonely castle, and a puppet for the woman who sat before her, calmly stitching the flowers onto a piece of cloth while she had just ripped Rosalind's entire world to shreds. With a choked sob she could no longer contain, she curtsied and fled the room, the lady's final, cutting words following her down the hall. "Do try to compose yourself. Duchesses do not blubber like children." The journey to Alderwood was a journey into isolation. The lush, rolling hills of the south gradually gave way to rugged, wind-swept moorlands, the landscape growing wilder and more desolate with every mile. The carriage, though finely sprung, felt like a hearse, carrying Rosalind to the grave of her former life. For 3 days, she sat in silence, watching the world she knew disappear behind her. Her only companion was a stern-faced chaperone, a distant cousin of the Beaumonts, who spoke only to issue instructions. Alderwood Castle rose from the mist-shrouded landscape like a jagged tooth. It was a formidable fortress of grey stone, more stronghold than home, its battlements piercing the gloomy sky. It was magnificent, terrifying, and utterly devoid of warmth. As the carriage rattled across a stone bridge over a deep moat, Rosalind felt the castle's oppressive weight settle upon her. This was not a home. It was a prison. She was met not by her future husband, but by a skeletal staff who moved with the quiet efficiency of ghosts. The housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, was a woman as grey and unyielding as the castle walls, her eyes missing nothing. The butler, Mr. Finchley, was a tall, severe man whose expression was permanently etched with disapproval. They greeted her with the correct deference due her future title, but their eyes were cold, their welcome hollow. She was shown to a vast suite of rooms, larger than the entire servants' wing at Hawthorne Manor. The furniture was heavy and dark, draped in dust covers as if the occupant had been dead for years. A fire had been lit in the hearth, but it did little to dispel the bone-deep chill of the place. She saw her fiancé for the first time that evening. She was told the Duke would join her for dinner. Dressed in a dark blue gown provided for her, a gown that felt like a costume, Rosalind waited in the cavernous dining hall. The table, long enough to seat 50, was set for only 2. Then he entered. The whispers had not been exaggerations. If anything, they had been kind. Duke Caspian Beaumont was a mountain of a man, his enormous frame straining the seams of his black velvet coat. He moved with a heavy, laborious gait, his breathing a constant, wheezing presence in the silent room. His face was puffy and pale, his eyes small and lost in the fleshy expanse, and his chin dissolved into a thick neck. He didn't look at her as he took his seat at the head of the table, his chair groaning in protest. Dinner was a torturous affair. An endless parade of dishes was brought to the table, and the Duke consumed them with a single-minded, almost desperate intensity. He ate with a shocking lack of decorum, his focus entirely on his plate. He did not speak a single word to her. He did not even acknowledge her presence beyond a brief, dismissive glance when he first sat down. Rosalind, her own appetite gone, watched him, a knot of revulsion and pity tightening in her stomach. This was the man she was to marry. This was the man whose bed she would have to share, whose children she was expected to bear. The monstrous rumors were true. He was not a man. He was an appetite. The wedding, 2 days later, was the coldest ceremony imaginable. It took place in the castle's private chapel, a place of damp stone and faded tapestries. The only attendees were Mrs. Gable, Mr. Finchley, and the ancient, rheumy-eyed vicar summoned from the local village. Lady Genevieve had not bothered to attend. Rosalind felt disembodied, as if she were watching a play about someone else's tragedy. She wore a cream-coloured silk gown that felt like a shroud. She recited her vows in a voice that was barely a whisper, her words swallowed by the chapel's oppressive silence. When the Duke placed the ring on her finger, his hand was surprisingly soft but clammy, the heavy gold band feeling like a manacle. He still did not speak to her. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, he simply turned and lumbered out of the chapel, leaving her standing alone at the altar. That night, Rosalind was a bundle of raw nerves. Mrs. Gable had seen her to her new chambers, the Duchess's chambers, connected by a heavy oak door to the Duke's. The room was opulent, dominated by a 4-poster bed large enough for a family. She sat on its edge, clad in a white silk nightgown, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every creak of the old castle made her jump. She waited. Hours passed. The fire in the hearth dwindled to glowing embers. She heard no sound from the adjoining room. Exhaustion warred with terror. Perhaps he would not come. The thought was a small, desperate prayer. Perhaps he was so consumed by his food and drink that he had forgotten he even had a wife. Just as she was allowing herself a sliver of hope, the door connecting their rooms groaned open. Rosalind shot to her feet, her body rigid with fear. He filled the doorway, a massive silhouette against the candlelight from his room. The heavy, wheezing breath preceded him. He stepped into the room, and the latch on the door clicked shut behind him, the sound as final as a coffin lid closing. He stood there, just inside the room, watching her. In the dim light, his bulk seemed even more immense, more monstrous. She could smell the wine on his breath from across the room. She braced herself, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for him to lurch towards her, to claim the rights he had been given by law and by her cruel mistress. She waited for the beast to pounce. But he didn't move. There was only the sound of his labored breathing and the frantic pounding of her own heart. When she finally dared to open her eyes, he was still standing by the door, his expression unreadable in the shadows. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Rosalind's mind raced, conjuring every terrible possibility. She remained frozen by the bed, her hands clenched at her sides, watching the hulking figure of her new husband, the man who was legally her master. Then he did something entirely unexpected. He raised a hand not to his coat, but to his own face. He sighed, a sound not of exertion, but of profound weariness. It was a human sound, so out of place with the monstrous image he presented that it startled her. "You can breathe, girl," a voice said. It was low and clear, lacking the wheezing, guttural quality she had expected. It was the voice of a man, not a creature. Her eyes widened. The Duke, her husband, reached up to the side of his neck. There was a faint sound, a soft peeling noise, and he began to pull at his own skin. Rosalind gasped, a hand flying to her mouth, her fear momentarily eclipsed by sheer, horrified confusion. Was he mad? Was this some form of self-mutilation? But it wasn't skin. It was a prosthetic, a masterfully crafted piece of latex that blended seamlessly with his own flesh, creating the illusion of heavy jowls and a triple chin. He peeled it away, revealing a strong, defined jawline beneath. He then unbuttoned his waistcoat and the shirt beneath it. He reached inside and began unstrapping a complex harness of weighted padding that covered his chest, his stomach, his entire torso. Rosalind could only stare, speechless, as the Duke of Alderwood began to dismantle himself. Layer by layer, the illusion was stripped away. The enormous belly, the thick, padded arms, the weighted vest that forced his shoulders into a slump. All of it was removed and dropped unceremoniously onto the floor. With each piece that fell away, the man beneath emerged, transforming before her very eyes. The mountain of flesh receded, revealing a man who was tall, lean, and powerfully built. The sluggish, heavy-footed creature was replaced by a man who stood with the easy grace of an athlete. He ran a hand through his matted hair, pushing it back from a high forehead. Finally, he stood before her, clad only in his breeches and a thin linen undershirt. He was a complete stranger. The pale, puffy face was gone, replaced by a handsome, intelligent one with high cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. Those eyes, once lost in folds of flesh, were now sharp and piercing, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. He looked nothing like the beast of Alderwood. He was a man shackled by a terrible secret. Rosalind felt the floor sway beneath her. Her mind couldn't process the transformation. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. It was a trick. It had to be a magic trick, a phantom of her terrified imagination. "I imagine," the man said, his voice now laced with a bitter irony, "that this is not what you were expecting on your wedding night." He walked towards her. His steps were silent now, his movements fluid. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. She could see him clearly in the firelight, the tension in his jaw, the weariness in his eyes, the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Who are you?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. "I am your husband," he replied simply. "Caspian Beaumont, Duke of Alderwood. The real one. But the size," she stammered, gesturing vaguely at the heap of padding on the floor. "A costume," he said, kicking at the pile with his foot. "A prison of my own making. A necessary and deeply unpleasant deception." He saw the utter disbelief and fear in her eyes, and his expression softened slightly. "I am not going to harm you, Rosalind. I promise you that. In fact, You may be the first person in 5 years, aside from Finchley, to see me as I truly am." He paced the room, the caged energy of a man long confined radiating from him. "For the last 5 years, the world has believed me to be a gluttonous, indolent fool. A pathetic creature drowning his sorrows in food and wine, incapable of managing his own affairs, let alone posing a threat to anyone." A threat? A threat to whom? Rosalind asked, her fear slowly being replaced by a dizzying curiosity. Caspian stopped and turned to face her, his gaze intense. "To the people who murdered my parents." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Murdered? The official report said it was a carriage accident. "The official reports were wrong," he said, his voice hard as flint. "My father was a reformer. He was making powerful enemies, men who profited from the corruption he sought to expose. The accident was too convenient. It happened on a clear day, on a road they had travelled 100 times. The axle bolt had been deliberately weakened. I found the file marks myself." He looked away, towards the fire, his mind clearly back in that dark time. "I was 21. I tried to investigate. I asked questions. A week later, my horse's saddle cinch was cut. I was nearly killed in the fall. 2 weeks after that, a stray hunting shot whistled past my ear. It became clear they were not going to let the son continue the father's work. They wanted me dead." Rosalind listened, her heart pounding for an entirely new reason. This wasn't a story of a pathetic glutton. It was a story of survival, of a deadly conspiracy. "So I gave them what they wanted," Caspian continued, a grim smile touching his lips. "Not my death, but the death of the man I was. I vanished from society. I spread rumors of my own grief-induced decline. With Finchley's help, I created him." He gestured again to the discarded padding. "The Beast of Alderwood. A man no one would ever suspect of plotting, of watching, of waiting for the moment to strike back." He finally looked directly at her, his stormy eyes searching her face. "Which brings me to you, Rosalind, my dear Aunt Genevieve, who I trust about as far as I can throw this castle, has sent you to me. She believes she is shackling her weak, controllable nephew to a powerless, simple-minded bride. She believes you will be her eyes and ears in my home." He took another step closer, his voice dropping. "So now you have a choice. You can be her spy, and I assure you, you will find it a very short and unpleasant employment. Or you can become my Duchess in truth. You can help me finish what I started. You can help me uncover my parents' murderers and reclaim my life." Rosalind stared at him, at the intelligent, dangerous and desperate man standing before her. Just hours ago, she had been resigned to a life of servitude to a grotesque monster. Now, she was being offered a role in a deadly play of intrigue and revenge. The choice was between 2 prisons, the one Lady Genevieve had built for her, or the one this man was offering. A prison of secrets and lies, but one where, for the first time in her life, she might have the power to fight back. Her fear was gone, replaced by a surge of something she hadn't felt in years, a spark of defiance. She looked from the pile of padding on the floor to the man standing before her, a man living a lie to stay alive. She lifted her chin, her voice clearer and stronger than she thought possible. "What do I have to do?" A fragile truce settled in the Duchess's chambers, thick with unspoken questions and the lingering scent of deceit. The heap of padding on the floor was a testament to the lie that had defined Caspian's existence, and now, by extension, hers. Rosalind watched as he gathered the pieces of his disguise, his movements precise and practiced. He was not just a duke playing a role, he was a master strategist, and his own body was the battlefield. Finchley is the only other person within these walls who knows, Caspian explained, his back to her, as he methodically packed the prosthetics into a hidden compartment behind a loose stone in the fireplace. He was my father's man. His loyalty is absolute. Mrs. Gable and the rest of the staff, they believe the rumor. They see only what they are meant to see. So, to everyone else, I am married to that, Rosalind said, the word man feeling wrong for the illusion she had witnessed at dinner. Precisely, Caspian confirmed, turning back to her. In public, you are the long-suffering wife of a gluttonous recluse. You must appear meek, perhaps a little downtrodden. It will fit the narrative my aunt has constructed for you. It will also ensure that no one sees you as a threat. He paused, his gaze assessing her. But in private, in these rooms, you are my partner, my confederate. I need more than just your silence, Rosalind. I need your eyes and ears. My disguise keeps me safe, but it also makes me a prisoner. I cannot move freely or ask questions without arousing suspicion. You can. The weight of his request settled upon her. This went far beyond a simple agreement. He was asking her to become a spy in her own home, to navigate a world of treacherous secrets while playing the part of a simpleton. It was a terrifying prospect, but the alternative, being a pawn in Lady Genevieve's game, was infinitely worse. Your aunt, Rosalind began, her mind working quickly. You believe she was involved in your parents' death? A shadow passed over Caspian's face. Involved? I believe she was the architect. She is my father's younger sister. While he was alive, she was secondary. With him gone and me believed to be incompetent, the Beaumont family influence, the Alderwood fortune, it all falls under her de facto control. She manages my finances, my holdings. She has grown very powerful in my absence. And marrying me to you secures a position, he finished for her. By marrying me to a non-entity, she prevents a union with another powerful family who might challenge her authority. She thinks she has installed a warden who is secretly her spy. She has no idea she has just handed me my greatest potential asset. Over the next few days, a strange new reality took shape. By day, Rosalind was the Duchess of Alderwood, a quiet, timid figure who oversaw the household with a gentle but uncertain hand. She ate her meals in near silence, watching her husband consume monstrous quantities of food, the performance so convincing that it often chilled her to the bone. She learned to ignore the pitying glances from the maids and the stern disapproval of Mrs. Gable. But at night, the castle transformed. After the staff retired, Rosalind would slip through the connecting door into Caspian's chambers, which were not the sty of a glutton, but a Spartan study filled with maps, ledgers, and coded correspondence. The beast of Alderwood would vanish, and Caspian would emerge, sharp, focused, and relentless. He became her tutor in the world she had just entered. He taught her about the families of the peerage, their alliances, their rivalries, and their secrets. He showed her his father's research, lists of names, suspicious business dealings, notes on political bribes. The men his father had been investigating were some of the most powerful in England. This man, Lord Percival Morley, Caspian said one night, pointing to a name in a ledger. He is my cousin, my aunt's son. Charming, handsome, and utterly ruthless. He visits my aunt constantly. I believe he is her agent in London, the public face of her ambition. I have met him, Rosalind said quietly. He came to Hawthorne Manor once. He was attentive. I thought he was just being kind to a servant. Caspian looked at her sharply. Percival is never just kind. Every action has a purpose. He was likely assessing you, determining if you would be a suitable puppet for his mother's plans. The thought made Rosalind's skin crawl. A strange intimacy grew between them in those stolen hours. She saw the immense burden he carried, the loneliness of his self-imposed exile. He, in turn, discovered that the plain, quiet maid his aunt had chosen was possessed of a keen mind and a steely resolve. She had a memory for details that impressed him, and an intuitive understanding of people, honed by years of silent observation from the shadows of servitude. He began to trust her, not just with his secrets, but with his thoughts. He told her of his parents, of his love for the wild moors of his home, of his dreams of restoring the Alderwood name to one of honor instead of shame. She, in turn, found her voice. She spoke of her childhood in the orphanage, of her quiet hopes for a simple life that had been so cruelly stolen from her. One evening, as they were poring over a map of London, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same document. A jolt like lightning passed between them. They both froze, looking up at the same moment. In the flickering candlelight, she saw not the calculating duke or the haunted son, but simply a man. A man who looked at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with conspiracy and everything to do with the woman she was. He pulled his hand back as if burned. "Forgive me, Your Grace," he murmured, the formal title a sudden, jarring barrier between them. "My name is Rosalind," she said softly, her heart beating a little faster. He met her gaze, and for a long moment the web of lies and danger fell away, leaving only the two of them in the quiet heart of the sleeping castle. A fragile, unspoken connection had been forged, a bond that was far more dangerous than any political conspiracy, for it threatened to compromise the very roles they were forced to play. They were no longer just allies. Something else was taking root in the shadows, something that could either be their salvation or their ultimate undoing. A month after the wedding, a letter arrived bearing the Beaumont crest. It announced the imminent arrival of Lady Genevieve and her son, Lord Percival Morley. They were coming to Alderwood to inquire after the happiness of the new couple. A cold dread settled in Rosalind's stomach. Caspian, upon reading the letter, gave a grim, humorless smile. "The serpent is coming to inspect her cage," he said that night in his study. "She is coming to see if her puppet is performing as expected." "What does she expect to find?" Rosalind asked, her hands clasped tightly. "She expects to find you miserable, isolated, and terrified of your beastly husband," Caspian replied. "She will offer you sympathy. She will try to make you her confidant. She will press you for information about my habits, my moods, my health. She is testing your loyalty." The performance had to be perfect. The days leading up to their arrival were fraught with tension. Caspian coached her, drilling her on how to appear convincingly cowed. "Don't meet her eye for too long. Ring your horns. Speak only when spoken to. Let her believe you are a frightened little mouse, and she is your only ally in this dreary castle." When the grand carriage carrying Lady Genevieve and Lord Percival swept up the drive, Rosalind stood beside the costumed duke, playing her part. Caspian had added extra padding, making himself look even more grotesque than usual. He slumped, his breathing deliberately loud and labored, a wine stain strategically placed on his waistcoat. Lady Genevieve stepped out of the carriage, her eyes sweeping over them with a critical gaze. She offered a cool cheek for Caspian to kiss, her lip curling in faint disgust at his proximity. Then she turned to Rosalind. "My dear child," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she took Rosalind's hands. "You look pale. This northern air is trying, I know. I do hope my nephew is treating you with consideration." The last word was loaded with meaning, a clear invitation to complain. Rosalind dropped her gaze to the floor. "The Duke is, as I was told, my lady," she mumbled, letting a slight tremble enter her voice. "You are kind to visit." Lady Genevieve's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The mouse was behaving. Lord Percival was a different challenge. He was devastatingly handsome, with a charming smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. He bowed over Rosalind's hand, his touch lingering a moment too long. "Your Grace," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Alderwood has gained a beauty to rival its stark landscape. A rose blooming against the stone." Out of the corner of her eye, Rosalind saw Caspian's padded shoulder tense almost imperceptibly. Percival's flattery was a weapon designed to unnerve and disarm her. She pulled her hand away gently. "You are too kind, my lord." The visit was a masterclass in psychological warfare. During the day, Rosalind endured Lady Genevieve's probing questions and Percival's unsettling charm. At dinner, she sat in misery while Caspian played the slob, spilling wine and devouring his food with sickening gusto, occasionally grunting a monosyllabic reply to his aunt's pointed inquiries. "We hear so little from you, Caspian," Lady Genevieve said one evening, watching him over the rim of her wine glass. "One worries about your health. Such a sedentary lifestyle cannot be good for you." "I'm well," Caspian grunted, tearing into a leg of lamb with his hands. Percival laughed lightly. "My cousin has always had a healthy appetite. He focuses on the important things in life, eh, Caspian? Wine, women, and song?" He winked at Rosalind, who felt a flush of anger. They were openly mocking him, treating him like an imbecile. It took all her willpower to keep the mask of timid submission in place. The true battle took place in stolen moments. Lady Genevieve would find Rosalind in the library or the gardens, her approach always cloaked in kindness. "You must not feel trapped here, my dear," she said one afternoon as they walked along the rose bushes. "You can write to me. Tell me everything. If he is cruel or neglectful, I can intervene on your behalf." Rosalind looked at the ground. "He mostly leaves me alone, my lady." "And the nights?" The question was delicate, but its intent was sharp as a razor. "He sleeps," Rosalind lied, her heart hammering. "He drinks a great deal of wine and then he sleeps." Lady Genevieve seemed pleased with this answer, believing her nephew to be a drunken, impotent oaf. Percival's tactics were more direct. He sought Rosalind out when she was alone, his compliments becoming bolder, his manner more familiar. He cornered her one day in a secluded corridor. "It is a tragedy," he murmured, his proximity unnerving. "To see a woman like you wasted on a man like him. He cannot appreciate your spirit, your grace." He reached out, his finger tracing the line of her jaw. Rosalind flinched back, her fear very real. "My lord, you are improper." His smile was predatory. "I am merely stating the truth. A marriage without passion is a prison. Perhaps you require a friend, someone who understands you." It was a blatant attempt at seduction, not born of desire, but of strategy. If he could turn the Duchess against the Duke, make her his lover and informant, he and his mother would have total control. That night, she recounted the incident to Caspian. He listened, his face a mask of cold fury. When she finished, he slammed his fist onto his desk, making the candles jump. "He put his hands on you," he snarled, the voice not of the Duke, but of a deeply protective man. He began to pace the room like a caged tiger. "This changes things. They are growing impatient. They are testing the defenses. We need to force their hand." "How?" He stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes blazing. "My father kept a private ledger. It contained the details of every bribe, every piece of blackmail, every treasonous deal he had uncovered. It's the proof I need to ruin them. My aunt knows it exists, but she and her allies were never able to find it after his death. I believe it is hidden somewhere in this castle." "And you want them to think you found it?" Rosalind asked, catching his train of thought. "No," Caspian said, a cunning light in his eyes. "I want them to think that you have found it. The timid little mouse has stumbled upon the lion's secret. They will become desperate. They will stop trying to charm you and start trying to coerce you, and when they do, they will reveal their hand." It was a dangerous gambit. He was proposing to use her as bait, to dangle her in front of two hungry sharks and wait for them to attack. She looked at the fury in his eyes, a fury not just for his parents' murder, but for the insult Percival had paid her. She knew then that he would not let any harm come to her. He was no longer just her ally, he was her defender. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Let's set the trap." The plan was simple in its design, yet terrifying in its execution. The bait was a small, leather-bound book, a decoy filled with mundane household accounts. The trap was to be laid in the castle's extensive, labyrinthine library. The next afternoon, while Lady Genevieve was taking her nap and Percival was out riding, Caspian, in full costume, staged a scene for the benefit of the castle's most notorious gossip, a young housemaid named Beatrice. He lumbered into the library, accidentally, leaving the door ajar. Inside, he made a great show of pulling a loose stone from behind a bookshelf, retrieving the decoy ledger, and looking at it with a drunken, confused expression, before hiding it in a different, less secure location, a locked drawer in the main library desk. He then slammed the drawer shut and shambled out, pocketing the key. Rosalind, happening, upon Beatrice in the hall moments later, asked the maid to fetch her a shawl, her expression a mask of manufactured anxiety. She knew Beatrice would have seen everything, and that the story of the fat duke and his secret book would be in Lady Genevieve's ears before tea-time. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. The false sympathy from her ladyship vanished, replaced by a watchful, predatory stillness. Percival's flirtations ceased, his smiles were gone, and his gaze now held a sharp, menacing edge. They knew she was the key, either as an obstacle or a tool to getting that book. Their first move came that evening. As Rosalind was preparing for bed, there was a soft knock on her door. It was Lady Genevieve. "Forgive the intrusion, my dear," she said, sweeping into the room. "I was so worried. You seemed distressed at dinner." She moved about the room, her eyes darting everywhere, subtly searching. "This castle holds so many secrets. It is important that you and I have none between us. If you were to find anything unusual, perhaps a book or papers left by the old duke, you must tell me immediately, for your own protection." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. Rosalind feigned confusion and fear. "I don't know what you mean, my lady. I have found nothing." Lady Genevieve's eyes narrowed. "See that you don't," she said, her voice turning to ice. She left as silently as she came. The real danger came from Percival. 2 nights later, Rosalind awoke with a start, a sixth sense screaming that she was not alone. The embers in the hearth cast a faint, dying glow across the room. A floorboard creaked near the door. She lay perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breathing shallow. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows by the doorway. It was a man, and he was moving silently towards her bed. It was Percival. Rosalind's blood ran cold. The connecting door to Caspian's room was locked from her side, a nightly precaution. She was trapped. Percival reached the side of her bed, a silver letter opener glinting in his hand. He was not here to seduce her. "I will ask you only once, Your Grace," he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. "The key to the library desk. Where is it?" Rosalind feigned sleep-addled confusion. "My lord? What are you doing in my chambers?" "Do not play the fool with me," he snarled, grabbing her arm. His grip was like iron. He brought the point of the letter opener to her throat. The metal was cold against her skin. "My cousin is a drunken imbecile. He would have told his new little pet where he keeps his trinkets. The key, now." Terror, sharp and blinding, threatened to overwhelm her. This was real. The trap had been sprung, and she was the one caught in its jaws. Caspian was just on the other side of a thick oak door, completely unaware of the blade at her throat. She had to think. The key was, as planned, on a small ribbon in her bedside drawer, but she couldn't just give it to him. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to expose them. It's in the drawer," she whimpered, allowing a terrified sob to escape. "Please don't hurt me." Percival's lip curled in a triumphant sneer. He kept the blade pressed to her throat with one hand, while he used the other to fumble with the drawer handle. He pulled it open, his eyes scanning the contents. It was the moment she had been waiting for. With a surge of adrenaline, Rosalind bucked her hips, throwing her weight against him. He was caught off balance, stumbling back a step. It was only a second's advantage, but it was enough. She scrambled off the far side of the bed, grabbing the heavy silver water pitcher from her nightstand. Percival recovered instantly, lunging for her, his face contorted in a mask of rage. "You little fool!" he spat. She didn't hesitate. She swung the heavy pitcher with all her might, striking his outstretched arm. He cried out in pain and surprise, the letter opener clattering to the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. At that same moment, the connecting door to Caspian's room exploded inwards, the lock splintering as the heavy oak slammed against the wall. Caspian stood there, not as the beast, but as himself, lean, furious, and holding a fireplace poker like a weapon. He had heard the clatter of the blade. His eyes took in the scene in an instant. Rosalind, defiant and breathing heavily, holding the water pitcher. Percival, clutching his arm, his face a mixture of pain and shock. Percival stared at Caspian, his mind failing to comprehend what he was seeing. But you're not quite the man you thought I was," Caspian finished, his voice deadly calm as he advanced into the room. "It seems my hospitality has been found wanting, cousin. I generally frown upon my guests threatening my wife with a blade in the middle of the night." The game was over. The masks were off. And in the dim, fire-lit room, the final, deadly reckoning was about to begin. The sight of the real Caspian, vibrant with coiled fury, shattered Percival's composure. The carefully constructed world of Beaumont family politics, built on the foundation of the Duke's weakness, crumbled in an instant. "A trick," Percival stammered, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. "All of it. A trick. A necessary one, when one's family is infested with serpents," Caspian retorted, his advance forcing Percival to back away until he was pressed against the far wall. The poker in Caspian's hand never wavered. "You came for a book, I believe." From the doorway behind Caspian, Mr. Finchley appeared, holding a lit candelabra high. He was flanked by two grim-faced footmen who had clearly been waiting for his signal. The trap had been far more elaborate than Rosalind had known. "You will hang for this," Percival snarled, trying to regain a sliver of his aristocratic arrogance. "Threatening a peer of the realm." "On the contrary," Caspian said smoothly, "you broke into my wife's chambers with a weapon. You are the one who will be explaining yourself to the magistrate. But before that, you will explain yourself to me." At that moment, the main door to Rosalind's chambers opened, and Lady Genevieve swept in, her face a mask of outrage. "What is the meaning of this commotion? Percival!" She stopped dead, her eyes falling on Caspian. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking old and skeletal in the candlelight. She stared at her nephew, the nephew she had dismissed, controlled, and plotted against, and saw not the pathetic creature of her making, but the vengeful son of the brother she had betrayed. For the first time in Rosalind's memory, Lady Genevieve Beaumont was speechless. "Aunt," Caspian greeted her, his voice dripping with icy formality. "How good of you to join us. Your son and I were just having a conversation about family heirlooms, specifically, my father's ledger." He turned his gaze back to Percival. "The book in the desk is a decoy, but the real one, I've had it all along, hidden in the one place you would never have thought to look." He nodded to Finchley, who stepped forward and handed Caspian a slim, oilskin-wrapped package. Caspian unwrapped it and held up the true ledger. "My father was a meticulous man. It's all in here, Percival. The payments to the man who weakened my parents' carriage axle, the network of spies you and your mother placed in London, the treasonous sale of naval secrets to the French during the war, a crime for which a good man, a friend of my father's, was falsely accused and hanged. Your entire web of ambition and murder, detailed in his own hand." Lady Genevieve let out a choked gasp. It was all true. "This changes nothing," she said, her voice trembling, but still defiant. "It is your word against ours. A madman's scribblings." "Not just his scribblings," Rosalind said, stepping forward. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. "When Lord Percival visited Hawthorne Manor, he spoke with your business agent, a Mr. Crowe. He was careless. He thought no one would listen to a lowly maid. But I heard him mention a payment related to the French contract. I remember the date and the amount. I imagine my testimony, the testimony of a duchess, might be of some interest to the crown." Lady Genevieve stared at Rosalind as if seeing her for the first time, not as a mouse, but as the architect of her doom. The plain, quiet girl she had chosen for her malleability had become her executioner. It was over. Percival, seeing no way out, lunged not at Caspian, but at Rosalind, intending to take a hostage. But Caspian was faster. He moved with a speed that was startling, sidestepping the attack and bringing the heavy iron poker down on Percival's shoulder. The lord screamed and crumpled to the floor, clutching the shattered joint. The footman seized him. Lady Genevieve stood frozen, her face a ruin of defeated ambition. Her empire had turned to dust. "You will not be hanged, Aunt," Caspian said, his voice devoid of emotion. "That would bring too great a scandal to the Beaumont name. Instead, you will be confined to the dowager house on the farthest edge of the estate. You will live out your days in quiet obscurity. Your influence, your power, your name in society, they are all finished. You are now a ghost." As the footman dragged the moaning Percival away and Finchley escorted the broken, silent Lady Genevieve from the room, an exhausted quiet fell. It was just Caspian and Rosalind, standing in the wreckage of the night's battle. He turned to her, his eyes full of 1,000 emotions. He dropped the poker, the clang of it hitting the stone floor a sound of finality. He walked to her, taking her hands in his. "He hurt you," he said, his thumb gently brushing the red mark on her throat where the blade had been. "I am all right," she whispered, her own hands trembling now that the danger was past. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice thick with awe and gratitude. "Rosalind, you..." You saved me. Not just tonight. You saved me from this life of shadows." He looked around the room, at the splintered door, the fallen pitcher, the scattered remnants of their great deception. "It's over. The beast is dead." In the silence that followed, he did not release her hands. The space between them crackled with the unspoken feelings that had grown in their stolen nights of plotting and whispered confidences. He was no longer a duke in hiding, and she was no longer a maid in a gilded cage. They were a man and a woman who had fought a war together and won. He lowered his head, his stormy eyes searching hers, asking a silent question. She gave him his answer by rising on her toes, meeting him halfway. Their first kiss was not one of passion, but of profound, aching relief. It was a promise of a new beginning, a dawn breaking over the dark battlements of Alderwood Castle. The humble maid and the hidden duke were finally free to discover who they could be, together in the light. And so, the tale of the beast of Alderwood came to a close, not with a roar, but with a quiet vow of love and partnership. Rosalind and Caspian, forged in a crucible of deception and danger, emerged not as a duke and his duchess, but as two equals who had found their sanctuary in one another. The shadows that had haunted the castle for so long were banished by the light of truth, and Alderwood became a home, not a prison. Their story serves as a powerful reminder that true sight lies not in what the eyes see, but in what the heart understands. The most monstrous facades can hide the noblest of hearts, and the humblest of beginnings can lead to the most extraordinary destinies. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If their story of courage and unexpected love touched your heart, please show your support by hitting the like button, sharing this video with fellow romance lovers, and subscribing to our channel for more tales that sweep you away to another time. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story.